In this week, we are going to look at purchase order processing. This case study is based on the book that I list here. In this project, we will use the UiPath Robotic Enterprise Framework, or ReFramework, to process the purchase orders. We will configure an automation that can read the purchase orders from a spreadsheet, like shown here, and input the information into a purchase order application. After each purchase order is generated, there will be a purchase order number, or PO number, which we will use to update the spreadsheet. At the end of this project, you will learn the basics of the UiPath ReFramework. We will also review using the orchestrator queues and the dispatcher performer model. We will also use Excel and web automation. Here are the technical requirements. First, we will use the Google Chrome, so you need to make sure that you have the UiPath extension installed and updated. We also need to have access to the UiPath orchestrator and have your robot connected to the orchestrator. This is introduced in last week's class. And third, you need to have access to Apptivo. And I believe you already have this access because we used this in our earlier lectures. And lastly, you need to have the Microsoft Excel installed. Organizations generate purchase orders to procure items from their suppliers. And usually there are lots of purchase orders generated depending on the size of the organization. And in this project, we assume that we are working with a high volume of purchase orders, and the list of purchase orders is saved in an Excel spreadsheet and gets updated frequently. And we want to build a bot that can read the purchase orders from the spreadsheet and loads them into the UiPath orchestrator queue. Then, once the transactions are available in the orchestrator queue, the automation reads these transactions and writes them into the purchase order application, which is Apptivo. Then, the purchase order application auto-generates a PO number, which we will use to update the spreadsheet. The automation will continue to pick and process the transaction until there are no more transactions in the orchestrator queue. You must remember the dispatcher and performer model when we study the orchestrator queues. To upload transactions to the queues, we need to have a dispatcher. And then we will have a performer which takes each transaction from the queue and process them. And in this project, we will use the ReFramework as the performer, and we will create a standalone dispatcher to upload the purchase orders as transactions into the orchestrator queue. Here's a flowchart of the process. First, we will have the dispatcher to upload the purchase order details from the Excel to the orchestrator queue. And once the transactions are available, our performer, or the ReFramework, will take the transactions and process them. And for each transaction, the performer will go to the Apptivo application and create a purchase order. And once the purchase order is generated, we will use the purchase order number to update the Excel. And if there's no more transaction, this automation will stop. Now, let's talk more about the ReFramework. ReFramework is a UiPath template that you can build upon to create your own automation. This template offers a way to handle common project tasks. And the advantages of using this template include easily storing, reading, and modifying configuration data, handling exceptions, and retrying failed transactions, extensive event logging for all exceptions, and automating complex processes using defined states. This is how the template looks like. It has 4 components: initialization, get transaction data, process transaction, and end process. The initialization state is used to initialize the parameters for the automation project. The get transaction data is used to obtain data from different sources, including the orchestrator queue. The process transaction state is used to process each transaction obtained from the get transaction data state. And once we process each transaction, the process will be ended. One of the distinguishing characteristics of this project is that we assume we will be processing a lot of purchase orders, so we need to have a strategy to handle this high workload. And for this, we will use the dispatcher performer model, as I mentioned before. Specifically, the dispatcher will read from the Excel file and upload the purchase order transactions to the orchestrator queue. And we will use the ReFramework template as the performer that will take each transaction from the queue and process them. Here are some project groundwork. We need a spreadsheet for the purchase orders, and then to set up the Apptivo application to input these purchase orders. You can download the purchase order Excel spreadsheet from Canvas, and this is how it looks like. It has supplier, address, city, state, zip code, and item name. And we'll leave the purchase order as blank because we'll update this field after we get the purchase order number. Then we need to set up Apptivo. In our earlier lecture, we used the CRM function of Apptivo. And here we are going to use the purchase order function. And you can access the purchase order from the supply chain drop-down list. If you do not see the purchase order option from the drop-down list, please follow the following instruction to add this function. First, go to the More drop-down list and click Customize My Apps. And second, once you are in the Customize My Apps, choose Go to App Store. And then in the App Store, go to the supply chain and add the purchase orders. Once you are ready, let's go to the purchase order section. And then click Create. Let's use the plus button from the supplier to add our suppliers. So from the supplier name, let's add 4 suppliers: Lenovo, Cisco, Avaya, and HP. For each supplier, you just need to update the name and click Create. And once you finish creating the 4 suppliers, you can see them from the Search button near the supplier. So here I've created 4 suppliers like this. Similarly, let's also create a list of items from the item name section by using the plus button. In the item name, let's create 4 items: laptop, phone, monitor, and router. And for each item, you just need to put the item name and click Create. And once you finish creating these 4 items, you will see the list from the search button. So here I've created 4 items. Okay, once you are ready, let's start the automation.